Hello and welcome to Trending. Today's show is sponsored by the brand new range of Ickonic coffee, which is available in both grounded and whole bean. It's not bad. Been sampling it in the office. Head over to shop.ickonic.com and use the code TRENDING for 10% off. All the proceeds will go towards supporting what we're trying to do here. How you doing, Richard Willett, mate? Are you okay?
I'm good, thank you. All good. What a world we've woken up to yet again.
Well, exactly. I mean, we're going to get into the Trump, taking over Gaza stuff, because obviously that stuff's huge. But I just wanted to kick off today by talking about the Lucy Letby case, right? Now, for people around the world that aren't necessarily familiar with this is something that happened in Chester, in the north of England. Lucy was a nurse who was convicted of killing 7 babies and the attempted murder of 7 more babies in this hospital. Now, I'll be honest, we spoke about this a lot. We spoke about it a lot on the channel. I know my dad has, and various other people like David Curtin and other people have. To quite a lot of vitriol, I've got to say. The case kind of stunk from the beginning. Now, I wasn't there, so I'm not privy to exactly what happened. But all of the information that was coming out, all the evidence, it was dodgy from the beginning, and a lot of us pointed that out. Now, since her conviction, obviously she's been in prison for over a year now. Now, since her conviction, more and more has come out, almost on the daily, hasn't it, Rich? I mean, we've spoke about it on WhatsApp, like each week, there's another revelation. So I'm just going to get into this today because there's the biggest revelation so far. Now, the weird thing with it is there was never any evidence, which I know anyone around the world listening will go, well, how'd you get convicted off of no evidence? Well, good question. No one ever witnessed her killing 7 children. No one ever witnessed her attempting to kill 7 more, right? So there was no evidence at all. Everything was circumstantial. Everything was theory. Everything was based on statistics, like the fact that she was always on shift for every single one of these deaths. Well, when you look into it more, one, that wasn't true. In fact, she wasn't on shift for a large amount of these deaths and attempted murders. They said her key card was used. Then that came out and said, well, no, it wasn't. That's not true either. Then it came out that what the prosecution had done is taken, I think it was around about the deaths of about 11 or 12 babies. Now, a bunch of them she had no contact with, no, she wasn't on duty or anything, never cared for them at any point. So they just avoided them. They just didn't bring them in. They only brought the ones that she'd had some contact with, and then said she was involved with 100% of them. It's like, well, but you've left all of those ones out. Now, it also came out about the fact that the hospital was actually under investigation anyway for malpractice, for poor sanitation. They'd had an outbreak, a viral outbreak there. There was people were saying that there were certain doctors were Googling procedures before carrying out procedures on these babies. Now, before Lucy got there, before she got the job at this hospital, it was at a certain level in terms of what level of sick child they could take. Then it was elevated, so actually they could take more sick children. This was around the point she was employed by them. So obviously the more sick, children you take, the more seriously ill children you take, the more mortality you're going to have. That's unfortunately just obvious. Then when she left, they said, the death stopped. Now, what they didn't say was the fact that actually it was downgraded at that point. So they didn't take such sick children. Therefore, the mortality rate was obviously going to lower. There was evidence of a consultant had done something wrong during a procedure, and I think it had nicked a baby's liver. Now that consultant then went on to be the one that blew the whistle on her. So there's so much stuff that stinks about this, Rich. And like I say, we'd spoken about it. Now this story that's come out is a panel of 14 medical experts from all over the world that have looked into the case for free, because obviously they've it's gone around the world now, and they've thought, well, I want to have a look at this. So they've looked at it, and they've determined that there's no evidence. One, there's no evidence that Lucy Letby killed any children or attempted to kill any children. But more importantly, there's no evidence that these children were murdered by anyone, and that actually it was poor practice. It was doctor error, and natural causes, because these babies are incredibly sick. Hence why they're at this hospital. Now, reading the article, this is in the BBC that I'm going to quote from. This blew my mind, Rich. And, given the realm we're in, it takes quite a lot to blow my mind. So I'll just read this article. Right. So there's a guy called Dr. Lee. Now, he's the one that basically started this process of investigating it and bringing in other professionals. Now, the reason he did that is because something he wrote, a report he wrote in 1989, was actually used by the prosecution as evidence of her guilt. Okay, so let me just read this. Dr. Lee became involved with the Letby defense after being made aware that prosecutors had used a 1989 academic paper he co-authored as part of their case against Letby. The paper focused on how air embolisms could lead to a baby's skin becoming discolored. So just to say, obviously, because no one saw her murder the children, no one saw her attempt to murder the other children, the theory was then that she must have done it, obviously, secretly, but by putting air in the tubes that would then go into the babies. That's what they're saying must have been the cause of death. It was relevant because prosecutors successfully argued that Letby attacked some of her victims by injecting air into them, causing a fatal embolism. Okay. Dr. Lee has accused the prosecution of misinterpreting his research, and he's since published an update discounting a link between marks on the skin and air embolisms. See, these marks on the skin, they're used by the prosecution as evidence that Lucy Letby must have killed the children and must have killed them this way. Now, this is where it gets really quite dark, I think, Richard. Last year, he offered to give evidence on behalf of Letby during her appeal and to say, in effect, that his research had been misused by the prosecution. However, 3 senior judges decided that Dr. Lee's submission could not be considered by the court on the grounds, they said, that the prosecution had not at any point relied solely on the evidence of skin discoloration to diagnose an embolism. And I thought to myself, hang on. So if you're presenting, 3 or 4 pieces of evidence, all of it circumstantial, by the way, and then someone can come along and go, well, actually, that piece of evidence you're putting in there, that's nonsense. That's nonsense, and I can prove it's nonsense. For then a judge to go, oh, that's fine, don't worry about it. We'll allow it to remain. So we will allow it to remain as part of the evidence against Letby that can then sway the judge in the appeal, which it clearly did, and it was thrown out. And subsequent appeals have been thrown out as well. They simply won't enter the conversation. I looked at that and I said to Jay before we started, I said, it's literally like, I would use football analogies, it's my upbringing, that basically you're 1-0 up in a football match and then you score a second goal, but you've handballed it. You've literally just whacked it into the goal with your hand. Now, someone comes along and said, "Oh, I've got video evidence here, VAR, that shows he handballed it." That the ref goes, well, "No, don't worry about it. We won't use the evidence of handball because he's already 1-0 up." I mean, what are you talking about? This is extraordinary. Now, this is what I think might be a bigger thing. Now, obviously, people look at it and go, right, well, she's clearly being railroaded. She's clearly a fall guy for someone. Is it the consultants? Is it the hospital trust, the NHS trust? Because obviously this hospital was already under investigation. And there might be some truth in that. Absolutely, there might be some truth in that. But I wonder if it's a bigger thing than that, Rich. I've got my tinfoil hat on, as usual. Because up until now, the mainstream media has laughed it off, dismissed it. She's a baby killer. She's a serial killer. People like me and you and my dad and David Curtin, David Davis MP, others that have mentioned it have taken a bit of flack for it. And even just yesterday, Julie Hartley Brewer, who's a presenter on Talk Radio, she pretended to be sort of alternative and anti-establishment during Rona, but when it came down to it, she really, really wasn't. She sat there and said, well, I believe that Letby's guilty. I've seen the overwhelming evidence. There isn't any. And no one's pretending there is any overwhelming evidence. So the fact that she sat there saying that on live radio, she's at best being disingenuous. Now, sorry, before I come to you, Rich, I'm rambling. I'm well aware of that. I'm trying to speak as quick as I can. I'm trying to be as Shapiro as I can to get this out. There's an article on Miri's Massive Missives. It's a Substack, and it's actually very good. And they are asking another question, which I had considered myself, to be fair, was because this is so ridiculous and this is so huge in this country, and it's so emotive. We're talking about dead children, dead babies. It's so emotive. It's you're on one side or the other. There's a lot of vitriol and anger between. It's everywhere. It's front page news for a very long time. So if this is shown to be a huge miscarriage of justice, and the fact that all these appeals they've attempted to have been thrown out while she's still now in prison, despite all this overwhelming evidence that it's at best an unfair trial, it's going to ask a lot of questions about the judicial system in general. And so this Miri's Massive Missives, he's asking the question of basically, is she the totem for technocracy? Will this be used, should they prove her innocence further down the line? Will this be used to kind of, throw a little bit of doubt into the justice system in general? Now, in his article, he uses this quote. He believes it will be used to abolish trial by jury. That's what he thinks it's about. And he quotes this. Writing in The Guardian in 2021 at the height of the COVID mania, BBC broadcaster Simon Jenkins said, "A crisis can often be an opportunity. The government should take this opportunity to give the system a long overdue reform. Jury trials are archaic and should be abandoned." Now, Simon Jenkins is far from the only one who has this view. Now, you apply that kind of opinion, which is quite common now, that trial by jury is archaic and should be abolished. And then you look at the pushing of AI by the British government, by the Americans, by the Chinese, by the EU, by everyone. And I do wonder, Richard, whether this is a way of getting in, tinfoil hat, a trial by AI.
It's the whole thing of him saying a crisis can be an opportunity. That's problem reaction solution in another way of putting it, isn't it? And I think this is something we've discussed, is that they can use it either way to come to the same ending, which is we want AI to take over many of these roles. So it doesn't even have to start out to be part of that. That could just be something that's an offshoot, that they're able to manipulate situations. There is something far, far darker and deeper going on there, in my completely my complete understanding of this situation. There is something else covering this up. It's the same. I had a conversation with Jonathan Rawl about the Daniel Morgan murders yesterday, and that wasn't just about phone hacking. This was about the corruption and the level of which these things go on and get covered up from the media, mainstream media, legacy media, whatever you want to call it, to the judiciary, to the police, to the Freemasons, to the whole system is totally corrupt. And when people talk about the swamp is around everything. It's not a specific place. So when you get trials like this, and it makes no sense at all, there is obviously something far deeper they don't want you to be digging in. And the Daniel Morgan murder, if people haven't looked into that, please do. It was a situation where there was obviously something far, far more sinister going on, and it branched out in all sorts of ways, even to the Maddie McCann murder. There's something far, far deeper and darker going on, and I think it's institutionalized within many of these connecting areas. So I think you'll find, if you really dug underneath this, they would come out at the same rabbit holes of these corrupt City of London lawyers, barristers. This place, yes, and then they can use that to introduce this AI system, and then that's just a bonus. These people don't care either way, but this is clearly far bigger than Lucy Letby, who looked completely bewildered as to what was going on when she was arrested. And the fact, as you say, there is no hard evidence. What happened to the evidence? Whether you think she's guilty or not, the whole point was you had to prove it beyond any reasonable doubt. There is every doubt here of reason. And that's the point. Reason is going out of the window and getting replaced by artificial intelligence.
100%. And the thing is as well, Rich, it's not even like these four medical experts from around the world are the only ones speaking out. Her colleagues have repeatedly spoken out on her behalf, saying she couldn't have done this. Her ward manager, they were the words that she used, like, she couldn't have done this. And yet here we are. She's rotting in a jail cell. Now, I can't even imagine what it must be like to be in prison as a convicted child killer. It would be brutal place to be. Now, I mean, prison would be brutal anyway, but certainly going in for something like that, the other inmates are not going to treat you nicely. Okay, so moving on, Rich. You want to talk about US aid and the whole almost nonsense of it all.
Yeah, the biggest nonsense of it all is this: how we're going to take US aid out. It's a CIA cutout. They all are, but it's this kind of this hypocrisy of going US. And I don't, what we're like. We don't agree with spending loads of money to the Ukraine from the UK or the US. We completely are on board with that part. But to say that is a waste of taxpayers' money, but then at the same time, at the other side of your mouth, give $1 billion to Israel and not mention a word is absolutely stunning to me. That those two things are basically, they're crowing about these things and they're not telling you why. And another thing I didn't actually realize was that the reason why they're doing this isn't nothing to do with saving money. It's to do with getting precious materials. So President Donald Trump says he wants to negotiate an agreement with Ukraine in which Kiev guarantees supplies of rare earth metals, key elements used in electronics, in exchange for aid. Ukraine President Zelensky has floated such an idea last October as part of his victory plan for ending the war with Russia. Well, they all would, because they're all part of the same messianic sect. We're telling Ukraine they have very valuable rare earths, Trump said on Monday. We're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're going to give them with their rare earths and other things. So it's not a case of blocking it because we think it's a waste of money. It's we want your rare earths. And that's something that's not getting across to the general public, that there's these rare elements and rare earths there that are going to be used in artificial intelligence. So again, it folds back into artificial intelligence. They're building this infrastructure there, and it has nothing to do with saving money for the US taxpayer. Absolutely
you
nothing.
You could apply
the
same to Greenland, Rich, couldn't you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the whole thing is about this artificial intelligence movement. When you keep coming back to it, that's exactly what it was. When you look into this deep seek, you find out that they knew about this in December. Obviously, the whole AI industry knew about DeepSeek. And when you really look at the funding that's going on, and you look at the funding for the US aid, still the top funder from the US is Israel by a long, long way. It's like 17 billion against 11 billion from last year. Both absolutely absurd. But to then pin all of that on, we're taking money from Ukraine and Russia. No, you're not. You just want their minerals, which is probably what Russia wanted anyway. And I've not, we don't like them giving money to this proxy war. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's about skinning out the West and demonizing the West. But this is about an AI infrastructure and moving these things about. And no one's talking about the fact that this is in exchange for technology or minerals to be used in technology for AI surveillance. This is all coming together pretty quick.
Yeah. It's all coming together massively quickly. And what I find extraordinary is that so many people that would consider themselves alternative or would push back against the establishment, the cult, would be massively against wars of conquest, of American imperialism. They're suddenly now punching the air about going and taking over Greenland or going and taking minerals out of Ukraine. Suddenly, because Trump's in charge, this is all a good thing. I find it extraordinary. Like, I've thought about this for a couple of days, that, the woke left was accused of having Trump derangement syndrome, which it absolutely did have and still does have. But now it's infected his own supporters. The fact that they refuse, and people will comment on this, giving us grief for it, they refuse to look at what he's doing. Suddenly AI is a good thing. Suddenly mRNA vaccines, oh yeah, that's a good thing now. Suddenly wars of conquest, taking over the Middle East, which we're going to come to next, and that's a good thing now. But it was dreadful when George W. Bush was doing it. It's absolutely extraordinary.
And it's dreadful when you're using all your US tax money to send to Ukraine all those weapons. Hang on a minute, you've just sent $1 billion to Israel. Yeah, worry about it.
Don't worry about it. It's okay. This is the major one, Rich. Trump, US will take over Gaza. I mean, honestly, you couldn't have been more obvious on October the 8th of what October 7th was all about. It was so clearly allowed to happen. anyone that's looked into it for 45 seconds, from Israeli sources within the Israeli military, all across Israeli media now, it's blatantly obvious it was allowed to happen to provide the excuse to go in and absolutely decimate Gaza, which is what they've done, and to annex the West Bank, to take Lebanon, to take large swathes of Syria. It's about the greater Israel, and Trump is their absolute glove puppet. As much as you think he's the savior, you're having a laugh, mate. You've been hoodwinked. Now, what he's saying is that the US will control Gaza long term, and the Palestinians will have to go either into Jordan or to Egypt. Oh, so ethnic cleansing then? Oh, okay. It's fine when we do it. Now, what people need to remember is that Israel controls America. So when Trump says America's going to take over Gaza, no, Israel is going to take over Gaza. It's extraordinary. Trump is the most controlled president in history. By his own words, I'm the most pro-Israel president in history. Now, the other part of it is that he's poking the Islamic world here, Rich, with this. And it's blatantly obvious that this is going to lead to carnage in the Middle East, because there's no way that the people of these Islamic countries, people of Iran and others, are going to sit back and say, yeah, don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, when we spoke about this before, the part of then you need to kind of bring in the religious side of it. So once Medina is sacked, then that's when the Islamic faith, those of the Islamic faith, believe that Armageddon started. So they have a story that each Abrahamic religion is playing into, and I would suggest that's been designed on purpose to play them off against each other. And once Medina, as I say, is sacked,
Medina being in Saudi Arabia.
It is, right in Saudi Arabia, but it does come in underneath the Greater Israel Project, which is King Ramses II's kingdom, basically. They're trying to recreate that. So obviously the temple being built, which is going to cause enough horrific carnage anyway, obviously taking down the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then going straight into Medina and sacking that. That is going to cause, that's it. That's kicking off time. And I mean, if we haven't had kicking off time already, people really need to get their head out of the sand, literally, at the moment, and realise that Donald Trump is leading everyone into a huge amount of carnage, and people who have supported him are going to have to come to terms with the fact that they've supported someone who's going directly against everything that they would want for their family.
Exactly. And more people are seeing it. You know, I mean, we'll get plenty of stick for this, but that's fine. I think a lot of people that are sort of getting it to a certain extent are looking at it saying, okay, well, this is obvious. He was always going to try and take over Gaza and hand it to Israel because he's Israel's puppet. There's no mistake that the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu, the true president of the United States, lands in Washington and within a day there's $1 billion worth of arms being sent to Israel. America's going to take over Gaza and obviously, hand it to Israel. The fact that happens as soon as Netanyahu arrives, and Netanyahu sat there going, I think we should listen to Trump's idea. It's an interesting idea. It's not Donald's idea, baby. Don't insult my intelligence, mate. But what people
Donald
are looking
hasn't
at,
had any ideas of his own.
No, well, exactly. Exactly.
Decades.
But people look at it, Rich, and they say, no, it's about natural resources like gas, which, of course, Gaza has an awful lot of off the coast of Gaza in the Mediterranean. And that will almost certainly be an element. And then there's, obviously you've got all these people, Kushner, that are involved in real estate, that actually they'll rebuild Gaza. He's made comments about it being a beautiful seaside area. And so there's lots of money to be made and stuff. And again, that will be an element of it. But I think people need to look at the bigger picture, which is the Gog and Magog, the messianic end of time stuff, which people will listen and go, oh man, that's crazy. Like, that's just like biblical stuff. It's like, yeah, I don't believe it, but these people do.
Absolutely. They absolutely do. And this is what's driving it all. And they know that you'll look at it and go, that's mad. Yes, these are mad people. And as you said, the kind of offshoot extras that are there for them is total byproducts, these things. It's this agenda. This is this return to the promised land nonsense. And this is what's driving every single one of them. And when you look, and again, we keep banging on about it, when you look at Zelensky and you look at Malay and you look at Netanyahu and you look at Putin and you look at Donald Trump and you look at Jared Kushner and Doshevich and RFK Jr., they are all surrounded by these messianic bad guys. It's look at what they believe and how they're influencing these people. So you're seeing a massive theatre of all of these bit props basically being moved around, which are countries for them. And that's what's happening. It's the slow move, and it's consistently moving in this direction. And there is no mistaking that this is what's happening. So people need to get to understand what that agenda is. Even today, when they sat next to each other, or yesterday, and they were shaking hands and kissing each other, they Donald Trump was getting at using Kabbalah codes. He said we're going to move 107 or 108 million, or 107, the 7 and the 8. The 7th is the Sabbath, and the 8th is the world to come, the menorah. They're using Kabbalah codes and laughing at you. They were not random numbers. 107 million, I think he said, and 108 million. And that's them coding to each other that they're on the same page, and those who are watching. Have a look at it. They're not random numbers. The 7 and the 8 is the Sabbath. The 8th is the world to come. You just need to learn how to read it.
The thing is as well, like people will listen to this and go, oh, you know, this whole messianic third temple, Gog and Magog, end of times, oh, it's all a bit far-fetched, whatever. But you just need to listen to the words of Netanyahu himself. He has spoken about these biblical texts and used it to justify what they have done in Gaza and what they obviously will do in Gaza. Now, for me, it's an interesting one because October 7th was clearly allowed to happen. Like I said, anyone who paid attention could see that was allowed to happen in so many different ways. So many warnings were ignored. Guards were taken off the fence so that they were unguarded, and they were allowed in. It was allowed to happen. Now, that's now illegal in Israel, punishable by 5 years in prison, to question the official story of October 7th, which is obviously, that's exactly what you do, isn't it? When your story's watertight, you make it illegal to question it. Now, in America, obviously, another swish of his pen, he's brought in these anti-Semitism laws, which include basically cancelling the visas of foreign students that have protested against Israel. Now, you would look at that and you go, oh, that's because of all the protests that have gone on. Partly, but I would suggest it's actually a preemptive strike against the protests that are coming, because Trump's not hiding anything anymore. The emperor's got his meat and two veg out now in terms of what the plan is for what they want to do, and so they are going to go hard into Gaza, into the Middle East, and that is going to have a lot of people up in arms. Hopefully a lot of his supporters, but we'll see what happens. But hopefully a lot of his supporters up in arms, and that's where the preemptive strike of bringing in, basically the decimation of the First Amendment, free speech rules to shut people up, because they know what's coming. They know people aren't going to be happy about it, Rich.
Yeah, and wait until the surveillance state is all locked in. Then you're not going to be able to do that from the get-go. That's going to be locked off, and you'll be locked out of that system straight away for even questioning it in your own home. It's just insane, and it's so obvious to see. Frustrating when you've been trying to point this out for so long. And this just plays into it. The next story, Gaz, is that Google drops pledge not to use AI for weapons and surveillance. Well, what do you call weapons and surveillance?
Well, I wouldn't trust Google to tell me the time, Rich.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. But it's such a vague term. The tech giant says in updated ethics policy that it will use AI in line with international law and human rights. Obviously, total nonsense. DARPA, Alphabet Communications and company, exactly what Google is, just part of that. So they're aware that people are questioning it. But what total nonsense? Obviously, that's what it is. I'm not going to use a car to drive.
No.
That's what Google is. It's a surveillance technology. It's a weapon. That's what it's designed to be. It's absurd. But people will buy it. People will actually think that, they're not really spying on us. They are. And also, you're giving them information anyway on social media every day. We all are. So they don't really need to spy on you. You're just giving it up. You've been trained and indoctrinated, as we all have, to go, look what I'm doing. Everybody look at me. So they don't need to spy on you. You're shouting it from the rooftops anyway.
Yeah, but the words that you say will be used against you in the future. I honestly believe that a
Absolutely.
lot of this so-called allowing of free speech on certain platforms wasn't about allowing free speech, because Elon Musk doesn't want free speech, which is why people get demonetized, censored, algorithmically, basically bloody, non-personed if they question him. So he doesn't care about free speech, but he's allowed people to say things that I think will then be used against them later on, certainly with these, anti-Semitism laws that Trump's pushed through. It's crazy times, Rich, mate, but,
Malay's come out with his future crime thing already last year. That's all part of it. Malay, again, part of this messianic agenda.
Yeah.
Have a look into it, guys.
Yeah, that's the thing. I would urge people to go and have a look at that, because just because you don't necessarily believe in this, and we don't either, it doesn't mean that they don't. And actually, when people look at prophecy, it's not prophecy if they make it happen, which is what I believe is happening now. But I've enjoyed the chat, Richard, despite the the darkness of world events. We will get there in the end. I'm going to go and get myself another coffee, as I sort of plugged at the start. We've got Ickonic coffee now. That's drunk. And you can head over to shop.ickonic.com. And if you use the code TRENDING, you get 10% off everything. And like I said, any proceeds we get from the coffee will be thrown back into Ickonic so we can bring you more information. I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, take care. Goodbye.